Isn't the Buddha kind of a hypocrite? I mean, sure, he gave up all worldly goods, his father's money, told us all to live a life of restraint, and then he ended up like super fat, like crazy fat. Like, come on, dude.
You're talking about those statues you see in Chinatown, right?
Yeah.
The Buddha depicted in those statues, he's Asian, right?
Right.
So...
It's not the Buddha.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. Siddhartha Gautama was an Indian from Nepal. A Chinese monk came to India, became a Buddhist, went home and started spreading the religion.
The Chinese mixed in Taoism. Their monks introduced the head shaving, the robes, the fat, happy Buddha named Hote. The actual Buddha was a regular man, normal body, full head of hair.
But he was a god.
No. Never claimed to be. Just a man who thought long and hard about the human condition and achieved enlightenment.
Like Jesus. Only without the long blonde hair and blue eyes.
But Jesus wasn't just a man.
No?
He claimed to be the Son of God. He died and was resurrected, so we know he was divine.
You know or you have faith? You can only know what you can prove. God is beyond proof, logic, or reason. You can believe in God or Jesus through faith, but that's different from knowing.
Well, I know Jesus existed. There's historical evidence of that, and I have faith that he was divine.
Aquinas said faith is a divine act supernaturally bestowed. Ask and ye shall receive. Kierkegaard, on the other hand, said that we must leap to faith. It is an act that you must choose to perform. Kierkegaard was more demanding. Okay, he was sick of people sitting around talking about religion all day and not doing anything about it. I hope he didn't mean this class, though. But weren't we supposed to be talking about Buddha?
They had a lot in common, Jesus and Buddha.
How so?
Well, there's a lot of overlap in their philosophies. They both taught the golden rule that we should be charitable and not judge others.
But the Buddha said you shouldn't believe in something just because it's written in scripture. The whole premise with Jesus is to accept on faith. That's a pretty huge difference.
And also the purpose of suffering. Jesus suffered for us.
While the Buddha's whole thing was to eliminate suffering.
And that's one of the things I always find interesting about people when they talk about another religion, as if they know or even understand the historicity of those religions and want to make their claims, such as that, Buddha claimed to be God, that Buddha and Jesus had a lot of similar teachings, but they were very different in their teachings as well. Now, I know that show is kind of a little bit Hollywooded up, but when you look at it for what they are talking about, the fact still remains that what he said as far as being able to prove God is unprovable. Because if there is a God, then that God would be unknowable and undefinable. So the mere fact that any religion would claim that they know God, they can prove God, they see God acting in their life every day, and all these different sorts of claims that people like to make, really just shows how little they really understand the concept of a God. And even more so, how little we understand the concept of different religions. I've seen many people who would claim that, the fat Buddha, not realizing that that's Chinese Buddha. That's a different guy who the Chinese say this monk reached enlightenment and became a Buddha, because that's what it means to become a Buddha, is to become an enlightened one. Not that you become a God or a son of God or anything other than someone who has thought about life, lived the principles, and now have come into a level of enlightenment. Which is one of the reasons why I do like the philosophy of Buddhism to a certain extent, because it's about learning and understanding life. And Buddha's goal was to eliminate suffering, which is a lofty goal, but to eliminate suffering within yourself. You're never going to eliminate suffering throughout the whole world, because everybody will have to come into the Buddha mind in order to be able to do that. In the same way, some Christians will talk about the Christ mind and only look at the good parts concerning Jesus' teachings, and not look at the fact that if you believe in Jesus, then you have to believe in the Old Testament God, who is very much not a good God through all his cruelties and genocides and things of that nature. But to have the Christ mind, it's merely just meaning to have an anointed mind, but it doesn't necessarily mean anointed in the belief of Christianity or Judaism, But to be anointed, to be able to elevate your consciousness to be higher than that of the average human who does think of greed and cruelties and things of that nature as being justified by some God because he created us and so he can do whatever he wants. That's not an enlightened mind at all. That is a cruel mind that has been brainwashed and will look for anything to go along with their narrative. But people have this misconception because they don't know nor take the time to understand how these religions came about. Siddhartha Gautama was an Indian, like the young lady said. He was an ascetic beforehand, so he was very thin, actually, very thin man. And even when he came into enlightenment, he remained thin. So that is not the Buddha anytime somebody sees those kinds of things. But I do like the fact, even though they didn't tackle the fact that there is actually no historical data of the biblical Jesus existing, a person named Yahshua or Yehoshua or Yeshua who could have existed and claimed to be an anointed one during the first century, early first century, possible. There are writings that describe many people of that name who was walking around making this claim, but none of them are the biblical. You can't prove the miracle healing, walking on water Jesus. That you will never be able to prove. Therefore, it becomes merely a point of faith and not a point of facts, simply because a book says so. A book that is not written by anyone who actually eyewitnessed any of those such events. So therefore, it is not provable, and it becomes purely and only a item of faith. And so you can't argue faith. If you want to believe in something, then you believe it. It's completely up to you. But to try to claim it as facts, that's where you're going to lose the argument every time, because you will never, ever, ever, ever be able to prove it as anything but facts. But without questioning, without asking questions, without delving deep into the historicity of any of these religions, will you ever find a modicum of truth about what actually was going on and who did what and when, where, why, and how. But I like the way that this was presented in a classroom where people would have an opportunity to make their statements and their questions, but how the teacher, without harming anyone's faith or just or judging the person themselves, he just merely explained the true reality of what the person is actually saying and believing. So unless you can prove it, it is not to be believed. Until you can prove it, it is not to be believed, other than beyond you just desiring to have faith and forcing yourself to believe it. But beyond that, y'all have a great day. And remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.